It's Vaz here from Aussie Playground, and welcome to my review of the Kraton 6S BLX as well as the OutCast 6S BLX. Why am I doing the review of both of these vehicles together? Well, because one of the most commonly asked questions that I get ever since the OutCast has come out, because of course it came out after the Kraton, and a lot of people know that I have both of them. One of the most common questions I get asked is, which one should I choose? Should I choose the OutCast or should I choose the Kraton? Well, I'm hoping that by the end of this review, you have enough information for you to make up your own mind. I'm not going to choose for you. I'm not going to try and sway one direction or the other. I'm just going to give you the information that you need to hopefully make up your own mind and choose which one of these would suit you best. Now, I am going to forewarn you here. This review may be a little bit longer than normal, and I may also upset some people because one of the scores for one of these trucks is going to be somewhat a little bit of a controversy, I feel, and it's only because of the way I feel about that particular vehicle. Now, both of these trucks use the exact same electrics. They both have the BLX 185 combo from ARRMA. They're both capable of running on 6S as well as 4S. And, they're both capable of, well, allegedly 60 miles an hour. This one, I was able to achieve that speed quite easily. This one was definitely a little bit trickier to do. I think the speed is in it. It does have the ability to do it, but actually being able to put that power down and get it down on a radar gun or a GPS makes it very, very difficult because of its shorter wheelbase. Now, you might be asking, what are some of the common differences between these two vehicles? Well, the Kraton is based on a truggy, so it's got a long chassis, it's got a wide stance. It's actually a bit wider than the Talion, although the Talion is the exact same wheelbase. This is very much a truggy-based vehicle, so it handles very much like a truggy, although it is branded as a monster truck. This one is a very different beast, although similar in some ways. It has a 1/8 scale buggy chassis, or in fact it's running the same chassis that you'll find on the Typhon or the Centon. However, I do believe that the holes that they've drilled for the battery tray and a few other components may be a little bit different, because initially I thought that they would have the same drillings and you should be able to take out the old battery tray and put this new one in, because this uses a Velcro, like a different system for the battery tray. As it turns out, a few people have tried it and apparently the holes don't quite line up and people have to re-drill the chassis to put this new battery tray in, which is a little bit disappointing. I thought they would have used the existing holes, but that's what I've heard. I haven't personally tried it myself, but that's something just keep in mind there if you are planning on changing the battery tray on your Kraton or your Talion or any of the existing platforms, and you want to go for the battery tray rather that comes with the OutCast. I'm not 100% sure, but from what I hear, the holes don't line up exactly for you to bolt it on straight away. So they're the differences in chassis. The A-arms on this OutCast are the same as the A-arms that you'll find on the Kraton and the Talion. And the shock towers, I think, are the same. From memory, I do believe that they are the same for the shock towers, and the shocks as well are exactly the same. But as you can see, different tires, different body, different wing, a few other differences as well as, in the chassis, there's different plastics and so forth. I'm not going to dive too much into the exact differences between them. I'll have links in the unboxing videos that I did for both vehicles. I'm very thorough in my unboxings. I go through a lot of detail. Feel free to jump into the video description and click on those links if you want to see a more in-depth view of what these trucks actually look like when they were brand new out of the box. And also, I'll go through quite a fair bit of detail in all the components and the differences between the two, especially in the OutCast unboxing video. And of course, I'll have links to the running videos as well, so you can see both of them in action. Which one of these do I like? Well, I like them both. I think they both offer a different driving experience. This one is a very stable platform. I think ARRMA have refined this particular vehicle from the old one considerably. They've done a lot of the right things. I think they've listened to the public and some of the issues that the original Kraton and Talion platforms had, and they've addressed a lot of those. I think there is still a little bit of wiggle room for improvement, but they've really done an outstanding job on the Kraton as far as stepping it up from the V1 to the V2. The OutCast I think has a couple of little things that could be definitely a bit better. I think this was a great introduction into the stunt truck genre. And for a ready to run for around $500 US, this I think offers outstanding value, quite considerably an outstanding value for those of you who want something where you can just pin the throttle and watch the thing just do standing backflips all day long, or if you want to take it off a jump and just do multiple backflips. This is the type of truck that will definitely do that with ease because of the short wheelbase, the big tires which offer a lot of centrifugal force, making it very easy to do wheelies and backflips and so on, and do all sorts of stunts with it. Very, very cool truck indeed, if you are after that type of vehicle. That is the main difference between the two. Stunt vehicle, if you want to drive around the track, you use something like this. If you want more of a driver's car, driver's RC, something that you can really appreciate the handling characteristics of it, and you want to take those corners and you want to really beat your mates around the tree, or you want to beat them around the track, or whatever it is that you're going to be running on, this is the car that you want to have. If you want to do stunts and go off jumps and do backflips and do all sorts of crazy stuff, then this is the one that you want to have. They're your two biggest differences. Now, because I've already done my initial review of the Kraton V1 and I've done various other reviews of the ARRMA vehicles, I'm not going to go into too much detail on both as far as what things broke and all these little components and things like that. I think you get a general idea already from watching some of my previous videos of what these cars are about and what they are capable of and what some of their weaknesses are. So I'm going to dive straight into the scoring system here, and I'm going to start off with the Kraton. Now, for the electrics on the Kraton, I've given it a 5 out of 5. A lot of people will find that, well, they won't find. A lot of people will criticize me for this because I know that there was a lot of people out there, especially on the Facebook groups, that they complain about the steering servo not being any good, or that it's crap, or this and that. I've never had a single one of these fail on me, and I've had several of these ARRMA cars in my possession, both 10th scale and 1/8 scale. Never had a stock ARRMA servo blow on me, and you can go back and check the footage. In fact, I'll even show you right here and now that I'm still running the stock ARRMA servo in the Kraton, and I'll even take the body off the OutCast as well to show you that the stock ARRMA servo and electrics are still running on the OutCast right there. I've never had any issues with the steering servos on these vehicles. Centon, Talion, Kraton, all of them have been perfectly fine. I don't understand how people blow them. One of the things that I've done a video on in the past is, to setting your endpoints, setting up your dual rates. When you get an RC, especially these particular cars, there's a dual rate knob on your remote. Lift the tires up, or the front wheels off the ground, and check your steering. Make sure that the servo is not overstretching to the point where there's no more steering. I'll even put a link in the description to that video if you're not sure exactly what I'm talking about. You can go and watch it. It only goes for about 5 minutes, and believe me, it's helped a lot of people out. So that's something that you really need to do with anything that has dual rates on the remote out of the box. Make sure you set them up correctly so that you're not overworking these servos. Because even with the Kraton, I've actually put an aluminium mount for the steering servo, I should say, which means that there's no flex, there's no give anymore, as opposed to the plastic servo mounts that these originally come with. And I still have my servo working perfectly. No gears are stripped, it hasn't browned out, it hasn't cooked, it works fine. So I really have no complaints as far as the electrics. The old BLX 180 ESCs were known for blowing and for carrying on. This ESC, which I believe is a rebranded Quick Run Hobby Wing ESC, or at least I think that's what it is, perfectly fine. More than adequate to run the brushless motor that it comes with. Plenty of power on this, and one of the biggest improvements that ARRMA have done with these electrics is of course the speed. Now, one of my complaints in the previous models was that you had to go out and buy an additional pinion in order to reach that claimed 60 miles an hour that was printed on the box. Although ARRMA did provide an optional pinion in the box, it wasn't enough to reach that speed. Now they've actually done it so that you just have to put in the optional speed that it comes with, and bang, you've got that 60 miles an hour. You don't have to go and spend any more money. All you need is a decent 6S battery, and put in your optional pinion that comes in the box, and you've got 60 miles an hour. And I did it with this car, brand spanking new, out of the box. You again, check out the video description. I'll have a link in there to that video, and you can go see for yourself. There wasn't a mark on the car. I had not taken it off-road. I hadn't done any other modifications other than putting that optional pinion in there, and I got my 60 miles an hour, no problems at all. So ARRMA definitely fixed the power system. They've definitely given us a decent servo for the car. It may be a little bit slow, maybe some of you might find it lacks a little bit of torque, but it hasn't failed. I have several of these vehicles. I've had them for about 2 or 3 years now, maybe even longer than that, and I've never really had any of these servos go wrong. So I don't know how people are blowing them out. So that's why I've given this one a 5 out of 5 for the electrics. And of course, same goes for the OutCast. It gets 5 out of 5 for the electrics as well. Now, drivetrain. Now, for the Kraton, I've given it a 5 out of 5. Unlike my original Kraton, where it was having bearing issues in the steering knuckles at the front, I had bent the drive shaft and all the rest of it. You know, this one, no issues at all. No bearings have gone out, no gears have failed, no diffs are broken. Everything on this car works perfectly fine. A lot of people talk about, you know, as soon as you buy these cars, you got to pull the diffs out, you got to shim them, you got to do this, you got to do that. I drive them as they are. I drive them, I take them out of the box, I plug the batteries in, and away I go, and I test them out to see where their weak points are. And you can go and have a look at the driving footage again and see for yourself. I punish this car pretty hard. I take it on some really big jumps, and it holds up perfectly fine. I mean, how you blow diffs? Well, I suppose you can be unlucky. You could land under throttle. You could do some silly stunts on concrete, on high grip surfaces, and try to do standing backflips and all the rest of it. Put excessive pressure on these components, and then maybe they will fail. But for me, for my testing and the amount of batteries I've put through, I've put probably two and a half dozen packs through this car, and I haven't even opened up the diffs yet. Everything is working as it was out of the box from day one. Drivetrain for the OutCast, however, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Here's why. Both my pinion and spur gear basically disintegrated when I was out one time. I was actually trying to film my torture test over at the Altona BMX track, where I do a really big jumps with this thing and did my triple backflip with it and everything. I got about 2 or 3 minutes footage initially on one particular day, and both my pinion and spur gear disintegrated. And then of course I replaced those. I went back another time and then did that torture test, and so far so good. Those both pinion and spur have been okay. I don't know why that's happened, but I have seen on Facebook that recently there's been quite a few photos popping up of people blowing the spur or pinion or both on their ARRMA vehicles, primarily on the OutCast, and I think even the Kraton as well. But it hasn't happened to me on the Kraton. Only on this particular vehicle it's happened. So I don't know what's happened there. I didn't have that issue with my V1 ARRMA cars, and I haven't had it with the Kraton, but I think something's changed in the aluminium or the way that they do these things. I don't know what's happened, but there has been a bit of an issue there. Now for handling, on the Kraton, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Purely because it handles brilliantly. I still feel that the springs are a little bit short. I have told ARRMA you need to make these springs a little bit longer, at least 10 millimeters or so, maybe 10-15 millimeters longer. But they still continue to provide these shorter springs, and I don't know. I can't remember what they told me, but I don't know why exactly. They continue to have hand out short springs. So you do need to wind down the collars of your shocks quite a bit to keep the truck from sagging and bottoming out pretty much on every bump, not to mention the jumps. But every bump, you know, the truck really sags quite a bit. So especially when you put a big 6S pack in there or a couple of big 3S packs. But you wind the collars down a little bit. The tyres have been sublime. These tyres, stock tyres, have been absolutely fantastic. I did get a tear in one of them, and then I glued it back, and so far so good. They haven't come apart. No rims are broken. Nothing's gone bad. This thing handles beautifully out of the box. It is just so dialed. just so dialed. The diff oils, everything about the truck is just so well balanced. It drives brilliantly. And I thought maybe I had a bit of a fluke. So I had a friend of mine who actually bought the green Kraton with the green body, and we drove that straight out of the box as well, and sure enough it drove exactly the same. No, not even the steering trim needed to be adjusted. It was just brilliant out of the box. For both cars to be exactly like that, bought in 2 different countries. Mine came from overseas, his came from a local hobby shop, and he bought his I think a couple of months after I had mine. And to have the exact same results, that just goes to show the quality control of these vehicles and how they've tuned them and how they've set them up. It's just brilliant, spot on, fully deserving a 5 out of 5 for handling for the Kraton. The OutCast, I'm going to give a 4 out of 5. Why? Because I feel that that ARRMA have simply taken the shocks out of this and put it in here, have taken the diff settings out of this and put it in here. And I don't think that's right. I think that this truck needs a slightly harsher setup, especially with the center diff. I think it needs a little bit more thicker diff oil to stop so much power bleeding to the front wheels. And it needs a slightly more aggressive setup. I think in the end I ended up going for 500 weight in the center diff. I think I did 500 weight in the center diff, and it livened it up like crazy. Like, that's how I was able to do massive standing backflips and do all that those sort of stunts, because I had heavier diff oil in the center diff, which helped kind of stop a lot of slip going to the front. So thicken up the center diff, and you start to see a little bit more traction in the rear tires, and of course it does make it a little bit harder to get to top speed and squeeze that throttle and keep it in a straight line. But that really depends on how you want to set it up. If you want to leave it stock because you want to do speed runs with it, then go with that. If you want a more aggressive setup, then thicken up that center diff oil, and that will give you, a little bit more stunt action, I suppose. So that's what I was expecting out of this truck, out of the box. I was expecting a slightly different tune, maybe some heavier springs, maybe some heavier shock oil as well, because it's designed to take big jumps and be a stunt vehicle. And I know I keep repeating that term, but I wasn't expecting to have the same setup. It was basically a transplant from this to this. At least that's how it felt. Whether ARRMA did actually tune something differently or not, I don't know, but it felt very much the same, only in a shorter wheelbase chassis. That's really all it came down to. So that's why I've given this one a 4 out of 5. I don't think they should do a transplant from one to the other. I think this needs a slightly different tune to really make it its own. To when you hold the remote, not only does it have a shorter chassis, slightly higher center of gravity, but when you pull the trigger, it feels completely different. It doesn't have the same tune. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So that's what I've given this one for handling. All right, so now we're going to move on to durability. Now for durability on the Kraton, guess what? I've given this one a 5 out of 5 as well. Nothing broke. I mean, I jumped this, I cartwheeled it I think a couple of times, I gave it a hard time. Aside from the body just being a little bit damaged now, it's got a few dents and a bunch of scratches and everything else, which is pretty common. I really don't have anything to complain about. What am I going to say that, oh, they should fix what? There's nothing for me to really say to ARRMA, you need to improve here. Possibly the only thing they could really do is make the bodies as thick as they have done on the Phase-On and the Big Rock, because now they're like 1.8 millimeters thick. It'd be great to see these 1/8 scale vehicles get that treatment, because I know the OutCast has the thicker body on it. Hey, why not do the Kraton with that same thicker body as well? So that's probably the only thing they could really improve on. But as far as the car itself, I can't falter it. I really cannot falter it. There's nothing for me to pick on. Durability wise, from the amount of abuse that I've put it through, all the speed runs, all the bashing, all the jumps, everything that I've done to this truck, both on 4S and 6S, it took it, and it took it in its stride. 5 out of 5. That's what I'm going to give this one. The OutCast, however, I'm going to give a 4 out of 5. Of course, as I said, the spur and pinion gear disintegrated on me one time, and the body has also cracked a little bit at the back, which, given the abuse that I've put this truck to, and given that it is, again, a stunt truck, you'd kind of go a little bit heavier with the trigger, and you try to do a few more things with this one than you would with this one in particular. And of course, you kind of expect certain things like this, like the body going out on you and so forth. So that's why I've given this one a 4 out of 5. Primarily, not so much for the body, but primarily for the spur and pinion gear. I think ARRMA need to kind of just keep the ears to the ground on that one and just see if there's any sort of pattern emerging with the spur and pinions kind of falling apart and breaking, because that's an issue that I didn't have with the V1 cars, and I've noticed it now on the OutCast, and I know that there's been a few other people that have had the same issue. So just something to keep in mind there. Now moving on to maintenance. Now for maintenance on the Kraton, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 because it is, you know, very easy to work on. But for the OutCast, believe it or not, I'm actually going to give this one a 4 out of 5. And the only reason why I'm going to give it that, I'll tell you what it is. And it's a very nitpicky thing, but the only thing that I could really pick on this truck is they've come up with a really good idea on the battery tray. They've got a little slot here for your balance leads on your battery. So they've got 2 slots in case you're running 2S or 3S. You slide them in here. There's a little rubber kind of catch, very similar to what you see on the bodies. Well, I think it's actually identical, and that clips into place and holds those balance leads there, so to save you from them getting tangled up in gears or getting damaged in dirt and mud and whatever when you're running your RCs. And of course it saves you the hassle of having to Velcro them down with your batteries. A really cool idea. However, it's buried deep in the chassis. It would have been great if they'd actually elevated this particular component, if they'd made it just a little bit higher so that you could get your fingers in there and be able to access that just a little bit easier. The other thing that I noticed was a bit of an issue is when you have slightly longer batteries, the batteries go right up against it. So you're trying to squeeze the wires in place whilst trying to squeeze the battery against that wall where the wires are supposed to slot into. It makes it very, very tricky to kind of have use those particular slots when it's really awkward to get to, because it's actually quite deep. Well, it's quite close to the chassis, and also your battery's in the way as you're trying to slide them in. So if they had elevated this particular component, this bit of plastic, just brought it up maybe an inch, just so that it sits just below the body, and you can have the leads just there. They're out of the way, and you don't have to dig in there with your fingers, and it's very, very awkward to do. So that's the only annoying thing that I found with this. Great idea. Needs a little bit of refinement though. That's my only complaint, and that's why, for maintenance, I've given this one a 4 out of 5, not a 5 out of 5. Because everything else on the truck is pretty much the same as your Senton and your Kratons and your Italians and your Typhons and all that. So easy access to the diffs, gears, makes life very, very easy. One other thing that I will point out as well, if you want to remove the wheels on these trucks, you might be unlucky and actually find that they're stuck. The hole that goes over the thread on the axle is actually a little bit too small, and I think they've just basically hammer drilled these things into position, because when I tried to take the wheels off, I had to stand with my feet, kind of put the truck on its side like that, and I had my feet on the wheels here, and I was pulling this thing up with all my might, giving it a wiggle, trying to get these wheels off. And then once I did get them off, I went with a body reamer, big body reamer, and just very slowly and carefully trimmed out the inside of the wheel, and then it was able to slot it back in without any force at all. So something to keep in mind, because if you do get this truck, and I know I'm not the only one that's had this problem, I've seen other people complain about it. That's one thing that I think ARRMA needs to just keep an eye on. I don't know where they're getting these wheels made or whatever it is, but the hole seems to be a bit too small, and I have put that to them as well. So hopefully they'll address that issue in future releases, and people aren't there with crowbars trying to get the wheels off, because that just shouldn't be that way at all. So that's why this one gets a 4 out of 5 as well. Now, for part support on both trucks, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Part support for the ARRMA range in general is getting better and better and better. Not only are they independent manufacturers out there like GKA making upgraded parts like I have here on my Kraton. As you can probably tell, I've got aluminium chassis braces, and I've also got the aluminium servo mount that I got from GKA. But there's also other brands getting involved in making upgraded components such as steering knuckles and other bits and pieces, and there's now more options for chassis braces and wing mounts and all sorts of things that you can get for these vehicles, so as upgrades, so to speak. As far as replacement parts, I'm finding that more and more hobby shops near me have ARRMA vehicles, and they're having parts more readily available. That being said, I did go to a hobby shop, which I'm not going to name at this stage, but they stock the ARRMA cars, and then I asked them if they had a lot of parts, and they said, not really. And I asked them why, and they said, because we don't get the demand for them. So people aren't breaking these vehicles, but when they do, they go to the hobby shop, and the hobby shop's like, oh, okay, I have to order that in. Because the people aren't breaking them that often, if they were to order the parts would sit there for months on end collecting dust until somebody finally breaks an A-arm, and hey, well, you got a sale for an A-arm. I think that's the mentality behind it. Not just that, but parts have been very good from, say, Tower Hobbies, although they do have certain components on back order, such as the wheelie bar for the OutCast, which I know a lot of people want to put on things like the Kraton and their Typhons and their Italians and so forth, so they want to put it on the older vehicles. So these things went out of stock pretty quickly, as well as the new battery trays, they went out of stock pretty quickly. And then of course the mud flaps and this plastic wall that goes around the chassis. A lot of people wanted to put this into their existing vehicles to stop dirt and mud going in here. So this is something that I think ARRMA really need to address in making sure that they have plenty of stock of these components, because a lot of people are wanting to put these on their existing platforms. So, you know, that's the only complaint I have. But aside from that, for the most part, I think ARRMA have done a really good job of keeping up with part support. I think local hobby shops and other online stores are actually doing a very good job of keeping parts in stock. And of course, there's always eBay. You can always shop around there, or just Google the part number, and you never know, you might be surprised at what places you'll find parts for these particular vehicles. Personally, I haven't had too many issues, but then again, I haven't broken too many parts. So I guess I've been pretty lucky, and I haven't experienced any sort of parts shortage as such. So again, 5 out of 5 for both vehicles on part support. Now for value, I'm going to give it again, guess what, 5 out of 5 for both vehicles. This one I think is about $500. I think this one is a little bit more or a little bit less. I tend to forget because prices seem to change considerably, especially at places like Tower Hobbies. They're always having sales, they're always having specials, and then of course you get your discount codes and everything else, so people will value these a little bit differently. And of course here in Australia they kind of hover around the $700 to $800 mark, somewhere around there, and that's actually really good value when you consider that, you know, its closest competitor for this particular vehicle is something like the eRevo, which is worth over, I think, $1,100 or over $1,000. So for a, you know, kind of a low center of gravity monster truck, the only one that used to be better than this as far as value goes was the MT4, which I remember used to sell around here for about $550, $600. Now they're becoming very rare and very hard to find, and most places are selling them $650, $700, almost the same price as this. But you know, Thunder Tiger MT4s are kind of yesterday's news. This is the new RC to get, I think, for an all-rounder. It's a very well handling vehicle. It's a very durable vehicle, very fast vehicle, and very capable vehicle as well. The OutCast certainly has a little bit of room for improvement. I think this is an extremely good first crack at this particular platform. I think it's great to see ARRMA kind of, you know, meshing a few different components together, coming up with some new components and creating something that not a lot of people have done in the past. Not to say that, you know, I'm sure this isn't the first and only, the first and only RC of its type. I'm sure there's been others, and I know Techno have recently released one that's exactly the same size as this, although that's in a kit and it's a lot more expensive by the time you complete it. But you know, it's great to see ARRMA kind of coming up with these concepts and doing these sorts of RCs, so that, you know, if you wanted something a little bit more stunty out of the Kraton, well, now you have the OutCast, and I think ARRMA have filled that gap brilliantly. Of course, for you, for those of you rather playing at home, even you're not keeping up with the scores, the Kraton, the very first RC on the channel that I really struggled to falter any major, find any major issues, and I gave it full marks on every category that I have. I really struggled to find something that I could go, you know what, they could do this better. I'm going to deduct a point for this, and I really can't. It gets 100%, 35 out of 35. And I know that some of you will disagree, throw Coke at the screen or whatever, yell at me, call me biased even. But go back and look at the first Kraton review. I didn't give it full marks. Go back and look at my other ARRMA reviews. None of those cars have ever gotten full marks. This one gets it. I think ARRMA have just gone to town on this car. They've really hit the nail on the head, and they've done an outstanding job. A brilliant job on this truck. And I've got so many cars, I've driven so many, and I always try to find a flaw. I always try to find room for improvement. And although there may be a couple of little niggly things that they could do a little bit better, it's really hard to falter once you, drive it. Just drive it. I can't falter it. 100%. That is the Kraton V2. For me, gets 100%, gets full marks. What more can I say? The ARRMA OutCast, however, very good score nonetheless, especially for I guess we'd call it a V1 of this particular car, but let's face it, it's got the V2 electrics, it's got a few updated components that have been transplanted from the V2 platform, so it's kind of like a V1 and a half if you think about it. But they've done a really good job with this. I just feel that there are a couple of things that they could definitely improve upon, and no doubt in my mind, ARRMA will go back and go to their R&D team and say, you know what, Vass said this, do it. I'm joking, they probably won't. But they're very good at listening to the public, and if you talk to them, if you send them an email and be polite and say, listen, why don't you guys try this? I really appreciate what you've done here, but why don't you, give this a go? Maybe this might work a little bit better. And just put forward your own opinions and your own thoughts on this particular vehicle, if you've got one, or, I know that some people said, in regards to its looks, I love the old style body, but I hate the spoiler at the back. Some people said that they hate the old style body, but they love the short wheelbase and the tires and the spoiler at the back. You can't please everyone. I personally love it. I love it because it's quirky, it's a little bit different, and the fact that it has a spoiler with an old style monster truck body, why not? Every other monster truck out there looks very similar, looks identical to each other. They all have that Ford Raptor looking body styling, and I think ARRMA have gone a little bit more old school, and they've done something kind of meshed some old styling with some updated format, and it kind of works. For me, it works, and it might be a little bit quirky, but it just works. The looks of it works, and the short wheelbase and the tires, which I know a lot of people say this is a rip-off of the Badlands. It might so be, but they do work brilliantly, and they are bigger than the Badlands too. So these tires are actually very good, and I think ARRMA have done a really good job with the OutCast, but they've done an outstanding job with the Kraton. Well done, ARRMA. I really struggled to falter this truck, and I gave it hell, I gave it everything. I tested it exactly the same as I did on my other cars. As always, I mean, I always say this in my reviews, that my review, my opinion of these vehicles is based on the experience I have with these particular products. It doesn't matter whether you're testing an RC, a TV, or a toaster. At the end of the day, one person will have a particular experience, they'll use that product a particular way, and they'll form an opinion based on the experience that they have. A different person will have the exact same product, use it slightly differently, have a slightly different experience, and of course will form an opinion based on the experience that they've had with it. So this is my point of view. Based on all the RCs that I've tested, I always take these trucks down to the same BMX track. I always show you live, raw footage, none of this edited stuff with music over the top and all this. You guys get to see exactly how these vehicles perform. And a lot of the times, whenever I do a cut, it's because the vehicle's flipped over, it's because I've run out of power, or a plug's come off, and then sure enough, you know, I go back to my spot, I turn the camera on, and we drive again. And that's how these videos are done. Minimal editing, and it's all progressive from start to finish, and you get to see exactly what happens. And when things go wrong, I show exactly when things go wrong. In fact, a lot of the times I get up close and I show you broken parts, and I tell you what happened and why it happened, why I think it happened. And that's, you know, pretty much how I form my opinions at the end of the day. Regardless of whether or not these cars get sent out to me, my opinion is, I try very hard to be unbiased, I try very hard to be fair in my reviews, and I hope that I've done that here, and I hope I've given you enough information for you to go back now, digest all of this, and make up your own mind, whether you want to go for the OutCast or whether you want to go for the Kraton. But I think this video has gone on for long enough. I'm going to leave it here. Again, I'm going to remind you, please check the video description for more information on these trucks, as well as video links and unboxings and running videos and things like that, as well as a link to my Facebook page, which of course will keep you a couple of steps ahead of what goes on here on YouTube. If you've made it this far, thank you all very much for watching. Please be sure to give the video a thumbs up before you go. If of course you enjoyed this review, don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I will speak to you next time.